Welcome everyone. My name is Kwabena Ansah and I'm the Head of Communities and Research here at the LO Agency based in Victoria. Thanks for joining us for this webinar on mental health in multicultural communities. Also joining me is my colleague Ash Chand, who's the Head of Sales. Hi Ash.
And, thanks everyone for being here.
Awesome. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Now, we do have one panelist who is running a tad late, so she'll be joining us throughout the course of this webinar. So, Krushnadevsinh is a youth and multicultural advocate. He is dedicated to helping young people and people from multicultural backgrounds find their voice and have confidence to be themselves. Krushnadevsinh is actively engaged in the community and regularly advises on policy to ensure it is culturally appropriate and inclusive. He hopes to share his common lived experience of migrating to another country to open the minds of others and to make the world a better place. Krushnadevsinh, you are welcome. In terms of our other panelist, Muhammad Hadi Rahimi, also known as Hadi, is passionate about community health and wellbeing initiatives. Hadi is a refugee who came to Australia under the Humanitarian Settlement Program. Hadi has direct experience of suicide in his community and during this time didn't know how to respond. So while studying social work at university, he also experienced mental health difficulties himself. At this time, Hadi reached out to Headspace, Armandale, to talk through his challenges and basically find a way forward for his anxiety. Hadi says that he wants young people to find peace, stability, and belonging when connecting with other young people. Hadi, you are welcome. And our other panelist who's running a tad late, Anna Wang, is passionate about helping people through helping young people thrive, especially when the odds are stacked against them. She's grateful to contribute to ReachOut's mission to help young people and their parents be happy and well. Anna's lived experience of being a second-generation Australian with immigrant parents has helped her to drive ReachOut's understanding and support for young cold communities. She hopes that increased awareness of mental health and well-being with young people today will mean a more positive foundation for future generations. And we welcome Anna to this meeting. So just in terms of a bit of background about LO and today's discussion point. The LO Agency is a multicultural research and communication agency providing community insights, communication strategies, and engagement programs to help our clients engage communities from diverse backgrounds. We get to do important communication and strategy projects with amazing clients and hosting these webinars to share insights from the world of LO and our clients. And also to get great guests to share their experiences and learnings with you, our community. The idea of today's webinar has been bubbling away for a while within LO, and it's a subject matter that's really close to all our hearts at LO. We also did a recent project with ReachOut, which both Anna and I will talk about later, earlier in the year, and decided it was the perfect opportunity to explore this topic. Right now, a lot of people across Australia are in lockdown, and so we understand that there is a lot of people experiencing mental health during these periods of uncertainty. So if any of you are struggling and are viewing this from your home, please make sure to use some of the services such as Lifeline, ReachOut, and Headspace, and Beyond Blue. And please get in touch with them if you are struggling. So the order of today, in terms of Ash, we'll be speaking to Krushnadevsinh from CMY. And so they'll be talking a bit about Krushnadevsingh's experience. I'll be speaking to Anna about the ReachOut case study, and then Ash again will be speaking to Hadi from Headspace. Now, after this, we'll be open the discussion up for some Q&A sessions. So please feel free to pop questions in the chat function down below, and we'll basically get your questions answered by these three amazing panelists. So I'll now hand over to my colleague Ash to kick things off. Thanks, Ash.
Thank you, Kwabena. Thanks for the introductions. So I won't hold it up any further. Let's start the discussion and start chatting with our guests. So we'll start with Krushnadevsinh from the Centre for Multicultural Youth. Now, I'd like to start with getting you to tell us a bit about your background and how you got involved with CMY.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Krushnadevsinh Ravalji, otherwise known as Kano as well. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently on Whatever country, which is on the western side of Nam. I also like to acknowledge, I know a lot of you, I think pretty much the entire country is in a bit of a lockdown. So just acknowledging that we're going through a bit of a tough time. So thank you so much for making the time and coming through. So a little bit about me. I'm coming from an Indian background. I was born there in 1999. And you know, my family, we grew up in the western side, which is next to the border of Pakistan, and we didn't have the best quality of life. And you know, somehow my parents figured out a way to loan some money, you know, sort of some generational wealth, did some risky stuff to make the money, get the visas to come here. And we, you know, first came here, typical immigrant story of living in a 2-bedroom house with 13 people, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, you know, not knowing anything here. And then I'm continuing my schooling, and now I'm able to speak English when I initially couldn't. And so I finished my high school here, and you know, when I finished my high school, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to get into. So I started typing into, I guess, Google youth volunteer opportunities. How can I get involved in the community? Because when I went to a language school is where pretty much refugees or immigrants who can't speak English, they get put into the school and you get taught English. So that's why my passion for working with multicultural communities with different diverse groups came from. And so I'm like, I need to get involved in the community. So type into Google, simple as that. Youth volunteer opportunities. So CMY pop up. I got involved with them in a bit of a leadership campaign in 2018, and ever since then been part of them. And now I'm part of them as a speaker. So I go out to communities and advocate on behalf of young people and multiculturalism.
Wow, that is an incredible story. And it's great to see how you come up through and taking it on as your passion. So I think you did mention about, you know, everyone being in lockdown and, you know, wish everyone the best, but it'd be good to get an understanding from you around your thoughts around what this pandemic has done to young people from CULT communities. And can you tell us from the ground, you know, what have you heard or what have you seen? Yeah,
so I think that's a great question, because I think this pandemic, especially these current 2 lockdowns, have been very tough for CULT people. Just not CULT, I think for everyone, these past 2 lockdowns have been very tough mentally and physically. But I think regarding CULT communities, I know even in my household, we don't talk about mental health, or we don't, you know, I don't talk with my parents about how my work life's been, how my relationship life is like. We just don't talk about that because there's some barriers, and I guess I don't feel comfortable with talking to my parents and they don't feel comfortable. So sometimes I find escapism by going outside the house, or, you know, going with my mates, hanging out with them, because we just get each other. But during the pandemic, because we're in lockdown, we can't go out. So it's almost like you're stuck at home. And, you know, because sometimes we live in a household, we have stricter values compared to what our actual values are. And I know for me last year, especially, that played a big conflict of, because I don't have any escapism. I can't go out and, you know, have that release. I have to stay at home. So I think young people do get a lot of, I know I personally felt a bit lonely, and I think people from CULT communities, because they can't go out, have their escapism, it became quite tough. But I think also on the flip side, I now play Monopoly with my parents, which I never thought I would. You know, I'm like, it's so weird that, you know, we're about to sit down, play games like that. So I think there has been a benefit around that. I think the other end of the spectrum is, because this pandemic has been heavily politicalized, sometimes CULT communities are the target, saying, you know, we're carrying the virus or we're spreading it everywhere. So I know when I go out, sometimes I'm like, and, you know, I got to make sure I wear my mask. I make sure I do everything to I feel like I'm carrying my community on my shoulders. And I think a lot of young people feel like that if they stuff up in the media or anyway, it's going to be like, this community let the virus out. So I think there's a lot of pressure around young people making sure they're leading the front, and especially with lockdown information changing every day, you need to make sure you interpret that and get it to your parents.
Yeah, it is quite a valid point in terms of the younger generation feeling like they need to sometimes translate the information to their parents or act as the forefront of the community. So it's definitely something that has been looked into. And I think in terms of the younger generation themselves trying to deal with the pandemic, what type of initiatives do you think are needed for cold young people who might be experiencing mental health issues during this time?
Perfect. Great question. I think Vasilios, Bill, has just asked the question in the chat, what are cold communities? So we're referring to CALD, so CALD, which stands for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So essentially communities who come from a different culture and speak a different language. It's a fancy, I think it's a different word of just saying multicultural communities. I think they're interchangeable. Going back to the question, I think for young people, it was how can organizations help cold young people? I think the biggest one would be to change their current practices. I feel like I've done a bit of work with a few mental health orgs, and the advice and the systems that are in place weren't made for people like us, people who are from a different color, who look a bit different, who have different family dynamics. So I think mental health orgs need to change their thinking around, they can't apply copy and paste the same advice to all communities. I think now with so many different communities and little things here and there that they need to be aware of, I think they need to train their staff to be more culturally competent and hire people who look like us, who understand the communities. And I think there needs to be a big push, especially for young people, around the stigma of mental health. And because I know in my background, in my family, like if you have a mental health, it's looked down upon. It's not something that you would publicly talk about. And especially in my, I don't want to bring, it's almost like I'm bringing shame to my family if I do say I have the mental health issues. So I think it's around breaking that stigma for young people, and also making sure it's confidential, because I think, we don't want to go to a therapist and, they're an uncle that, or someone in the community, and then it gets spread everywhere. So I think that those are the two big pushes I would do.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. So in terms of diving a bit deeper, so what strategies do you think would need to be deployed to educate the communities on mental health, particularly those who don't believe in its existence?
I think having more people who have peer educators, so people who have actually been through some illness or something like that, and then they go out and deliver the sessions or do some information spreading and normalizing it almost. I think it needs to be, there needs to be campaigns around it. It needs to be, like, I know when I was growing up, I didn't see anyone that looked like me that talked about mental health. So I think there needs to be more pioneers, and they need, mental health organizations to give platform to young people, to professors who talk about these things. And I think on the other side, for older generations, like my parents, there needs to be, I know my parents, if they looked at as someone who's got a doctor's degree, or they're a professor, or they're highly regarded in the community, I know there's a bit of a social hierarchy. If someone like that, who's very high above, talks about mental health and the importance of looking after yourself, the importance of recognizing that it is a real thing, it's not, it's just made up, you're not crazy if that happens. I think those strategies can be involved, where you need to go higher up and make it normalize it for the older generation. Because I know growing up, I didn't know anything about it, and my parents and we didn't have a conversation around that, and we still don't to this day. And that's a barrier that you need to educate the young people, but all the pressure can't be on the young people. I think it also needs to be on the parents and educating them, which is a very difficult task.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm pretty much in the same situation where speaking about mental health in my community is quite taboo from the older generation. The younger generation, we've started to talk about it a bit more within ourselves, but trying to express those into the older generation has always been difficult. So I think it does lead me to the next question around flipping the script and talking about the family. So the family unit is, an integral part of multicultural communities. And for many young people, we can see signs that their parents currently have or may have experienced mental health issues in the past that may have gone undiagnosed. So in this situation, how would we better support, the multicultural young people in having conversations with their parents or getting their parents to try and seek out help?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, because it's one of those underlying issues that doesn't get reported much or talked about much, because, like a lot of these older, I guess my parents and their generation go through similar things, but because they haven't had access to that education, to that knowledge, that it's hard for them to understand and realize that, oh, I'm actually, there's something I can do to help me, or, there's something wrong with you. I need to, seek some professional help. And I think especially the family dynamic that you spoke about is very important for cold communities, because I know coming here, it was just me, mum, dad, and sister. Like, there is no one else. And it's almost hard to, I know, in more cold communities, we don't speak up to our parents, or, we listen to whatever they say. We respect our elders. So I think for young people, it's really breaking those barriers down and letting them know that, if you're, let's say one of my parents was coughing or something, I'd be like, oh, get tested or get some medicine. So it's similar like that. You're getting the young people to change their thinking around, you're doing it to help them and to normalize going up to them and just be like, oh, hey, how you been feeling recently? Have you been stressed a lot? Has it been happening a lot? I learned this thing that looks after Indian parents or something like that. I think having, little resources like that, I think would be helpful. And in terms of the older generation, because they're so busy, they have so many, like, they're working, they have so many big issues that they're always dealing with. It's almost hard for them to look after themselves, because, they're starting from scratch in this country. So I think for them, it would be more community-based work. I think there's a lot of little sects around. There's like this religion sect or this caste sect, or these like little community groups. So tapping into them and, spreading the knowledge about mental health in their language, I think is very important, because just hearing mental health is like, oh. So I think just normalizing the language and changing language around that, and not going with, hey, we're going to teach you about mental health, using a different terminology so the older generation can be more receptive to it.
Definitely, I could not agree more. So Krushnadevsinh, thank you so much. Some great insights in there, something that we'll definitely take on board and move on further. And I wish we could keep talking all day, but I do have to throw it back to Kwabena, who will be speaking with Ansah. So thank you again.
That was really insightful, Krushnadevsinh. Welcome, Ansah. We did introduce you to the rest of the community, so I would like to welcome everyone to Wang, who is from ReachOut. So Ansah, our first question for you, can you give us a bit of a background to the project and what were the objectives?
Yeah, hi Kwabena. Thanks for having me. So originally we contacted LOTE to help us help ReachOut Australia undergo a research project. So we identified that we as an organisation had quite a limited understanding of serving young, culturally and linguistically diverse people in Australia. So, and there was little to no research out there relating to the cold experience. So we decided to, do our research ourselves. We wanted to get insights about the cold experience with their own cultural identity. So any challenges, any strengths about their experience, and any racism that they might go through. We wanted to also understand where cold young people might seek help, and if they do even seek help, like what are some barriers that they come into contact with, what would even encourage them to seek help. Most major support services do have a limited understanding of how to best serve this audience. And of course, we've made progress since we undertook this project, but there's still more to be done. So those were kind of like the main reasons why we underwent this project. And we wanted to use what came out of this project to inform how we as an organization might respond to this audience.
And I guess to help achieve the objectives, we conducted some qualitative research to help form some insights around mental health and cold young people. Can you tell us what that consisted of?
Absolutely. So we did some interviews and focus groups with a national sample of 14 to 22-year-olds. They were mainly first generation and second generation young cold people. So even from the beginning, this was a massive learning experience, because conducting research with this audience, they already have specific needs that might be different to what we're used to doing. For example, and I can relate to this growing up, for many cold young people, there's like limited to no privacy living at home with parents, whether it's because of cultural expectations in the house with their families, or if there's multiple families living in small spaces. Especially because what we were asking them about racism and help seeking, they can be sensitive topics. We had to make sure that our participants were able to get time alone, that they were able to, talk about these things safely, and they had support or friends to chat to if something did come up for them.
Yeah. Were there any interesting findings from that, Anna?
Yeah. So on the main topic of racism, this audience doesn't necessarily identify racist behaviors as racism, which is quite interesting, because their view of what racism is tends to be the more obvious behaviors like slurs or physical violence, because they hear about these things, happening 50 years ago with their parents and grandparents. So with these young people, when things like what we call casual racism, so jokes, stereotypes, and even like, comments, throwaway comments, even if it makes them feel uncomfortable or insecure, they'll just brush it off or laugh it off, because they're kind of like, what's the big deal? My parents had it way worse. So that kind of was quite interesting and really informed how we might frame messages around racism to actually reach this audience. What we also found interesting was that racism experienced by cold young people differs based on visible ethnicity. So people with accents, darker skin tones, or even like religious headwear tend to experience more instances and more serious types of racism. So for us, that meant that visible representation of this audience was important. And this ties into our next insight of cultural pride. So pride in one's own culture tends to be a strong protective factor against experiences with racism. So for a cold young person who is still figuring out who they are, they need to see themselves represented. They need to see someone who looks like them, like being successful, doing really well, being happy with themselves. So in that way, we thought that it was really important to be able to have visible representation in like the videos we produce, the illustrations that we get done, even like the imagery we have on site. We do need like a wide range of visibly cold young people represented.
That's very interesting. In terms of, I know growing up, and I came to Australia when I was 4, and I didn't really have a lot of visual representation. It's quite interesting that to this day, young people are still seeing that as a barrier. Can you add some more, shed some more light into that?
Absolutely. So it is interesting in that these young people may see it as a barrier. I think it's just because they haven't really had the exposure or, have someone to chat to them about how it isn't. Because, for most cold people, they don't see themselves as being different until someone else in society tells them they are. So I think this is why it's kind of important for organizations to promote awareness around how pride in one's culture can, be a good thing, especially if you're dealing with so many different expectations. You have a certain expectation at home to be a certain way. When you go to school with like Westerners, you might have a certain expectation to be a particular way. So I think it's important for these young people to have people like themselves, so either like peers or mentors, to be able to have these conversations with them and promote awareness around this.
Yeah, some great tips, and I think our audience out there certainly will take that on. I guess with the research, could you elaborate? Obviously, the difference between mental health and well-being was discussed, but also in some cultural communities, and mental health is not actually a thing. So as Krushnadevsinh was saying, in his household, they don't talk about or have not spoken about mental health. Can you tell us a little bit about that from the research?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I literally hadn't heard the term mental health until probably, late high school, because people started mentioning it. But in the mental health space, we sometimes use mental health and well-being interchangeably. And from our perspective, we mean it in a very positive context. So how happy and fulfilled you're feeling, how well you deal with everyday stress, how healthy you are in your body and mind. And if you're not doing so well, there's no one to blame for that. Like, we focus on how we can help someone deal better, what they can do to feel and stay better, where they can go for help. But in the research, we found that for many cold communities, the term mental health can be quite negatively associated with mental illness, which makes people think of harmful stereotypes. So we found that some cultures also believe that mental illness is a result of like an inherent character flaw, or that God is punishing you for something shameful. And even though these views are mostly held by older generations, even if a cold young person doesn't agree, they're still living in that environment. So they might hear certain things. The stigma is kind of still passed on and can make a young person in a vulnerable position feel quite ashamed and that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess maybe I'll throw this to you, Anna. One of the attendees has basically indicated, how do you explain? How do you explain mental health issues to your parents, because it is a taboo subject?
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because that's something that we kind of thought a lot about with this project, because parents are, in an ideal world, parents are meant to be the first place you look for help and advice. So what we found was helpful was to try and speak in terms that the parents understand. So for parents, what they want most is like their child doing well. They don't want their heritage to be lost. And I think that's quite important. So if you can go back to your cultural roots and in your culture find out how they talk about well. So for example, in Buddhism, meditation is like a common practice to help you be healthy in mind. So look back at your cultural roots and see whether there's anything in there that is quite similar to well-being. If you can find and like pinpoint those things, then that you'll be able to use language that your parents understand. So we found that was quite helpful. So going back to your culture, seeing what is actually there in terms of like well-being or health or wellness, whatever terms and language that you use, going back there and seeing what there is and seeing if there's something that would be able to bridge the gap between you and your parents.
That's really insightful. Could you also provide what are some of the formal avenues of support? So touching on anything that you obtained in the research around that formal avenues of support.
Yeah, so with formal avenues of support, there are, so with the kind of national health system that we do have, there are GPs, psychologists. If you're eligible for Medicare, you can go see a GP for free at a bulk billing clinic. And then you can ask for if there's a mental health plan that you can get. You can even ask to see GPs or psychologists or any medical professionals who are from a similar background to yourself. So that is often quite helpful if you find someone who understands what you're going through. Even if there's nothing specific going on, they might be able to understand your situation more and be able to provide kind of more tangible advice for you because they understand you a bit better. There's also hotlines that you can call. So there are national hotlines like Beyond Blue and Lifeline, but there are also kind of like state-specific hotlines. Yeah. So for those specific ones, you would need to do a little bit of research. And on the ReachOut site, we do have a compilation of like phone numbers and websites that you can contact.
Oh, fantastic. Overall, would you say that the research helped reach out to achieve its objectives and better understanding the needs of cold young people?
Absolutely. So we think it's really important for organizations like ReachOut to do research in areas like this because we don't want to make assumptions on what young people or on what certain audiences need. Like to understand what cold young people need, we need to ask cold young people what they need in order to actually give them what they want and what they need. So it's obviously it's a kind of ongoing process in this space because it's only in the past few years where it's kind of become a really it's come to kind of public awareness that it's quite an important subject. But yeah, absolutely. And it was also important for us to go about using the research in the right way. So for us, when we were translating the insights, we made sure we had the right people working on it. So for example, like me as a cold young person, depending on your definition of a young person. So me leading the project, people in the organization who are from a cold background having like the right level of input in the project, all the writers and producers that we had, like writing the articles, filming videos, interviewing young people, they're all from a cold background. We did also make sure to consult our cold content review group along the way. So we have a group of young cold people who we kind of send things to during the production process, post-production, and get their views on it, and made sure everything was like reviewed by a clinical psychologist who's from a cold background as well. So it was really important for us to kind of do everything in the right way.
That's so interesting. Just the process you went to ensure people were actively engaged in the overall research. I mean, I visited your office and we did a presentation of the research findings with the team. So I kind of want to get a sense, what did you enjoy most about working with LOTE in our broader team to help with that research? Because you do have a system at ReachOut in touching people, but how did we add value?
It was great working with such a dedicated team who are passionate about what you do. Like everyone I spoke to, everyone I've like continued to speak to from LOTE has been so passionate about kind of making sure the research is the best as possible, but also to make sure that we do everything, like we do our due diligence, we take care of our young people during the whole process. So that was really great to see.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Anna. It's been an absolute pleasure understanding a bit about the research, a bit about your insights, a bit about what ReachOut is doing for cold young communities. And it's going to be great to see what the future holds and rolling out some of those activities. Now I'll pass it over to my colleague Ash to have a conversation with Hadi. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kwabena. So Hadi, thanks for joining us. We've heard from CMY, we've heard from ReachOut about mental health in young people and the research being undertaken to support ReachOut approach with cold communities. So I wanted to focus on Headspace's campaigns and the execution of the programs and the impact that it has on people's lives. So given COVID-19 and the pandemic has been the hot topic, probably good to start there. So can you tell us about the Headspace COVID-19 campaign and how it's helped young people deal with their mental health?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much, guys, LOTE Agency and my fellow panelists for sharing your points. I think it's quite fascinating that every time I join sessions like this, I get to learn something new that's happening in this space. Obviously, I've been with Headspace for some years. My role is primarily within the clinical participation team. So just looking at COVID as a whole, I think this pandemic really shifted a lot of things in the sector, and as well as like out there in the community. I was hearing news, I was hearing stories from people who haven't actually experienced any of, I use a term which is more inclusive, like emotional distress or like mental distress. My friends were coming up to me and saying that I'm not feeling well. I don't know what's happening. So getting all that emerging themes that was coming from the community, we realized that we need to do something about it. So immediately we have to deploy some sort of resource, a campaign. That's when I get the national office decided to run a campaign, COVID-19 campaign, to promote the 7 tips that we have in Headspace, which are, hopefully on top of my brain, I can remember all those 7 tips: eating healthy, sleeping well, doing the basics, having a journal, having a free time, something that you enjoy. So we wanted to amplify that same tone, the same tips, through a campaign which was more targeted towards young people or on different social media outlets. So we use the platforms of YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. So between your posts, you would see those tiny ads which will go for like 10 seconds or something like that. It was all put together by the national office at the time of COVID. It was finalized in late August last year. So we had quite a short time to come up with a plan, a campaign that was especially targeted towards young people. As a CALD Young advocate and ambassador, I had a fair bit of input in that campaign, particularly with the tone, the themes, and the presentation of the message, because we wanted to make sure that those messages were sort of, we are doing what we are doing right, and we are making sure that the message that's going out there is really fitting well and really sitting well within those communities. So we were really sensitive with the information that was putting forward, that we were putting forward, and also with the language design, everything as a general. So yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I think it was a very successful campaign, and we do thank you for getting that executed quite in such a quick amount of time. And I think when we're talking around young people, a big factor with young people is schooling. So I did hear about Headspace schools being a national workforce that supports, engages, and partners with education and health sectors across Australia to build the mental health literacy and capacity of workforces. So what do you think are the most effective tools to engage schools, and what type of activities are currently being deployed to help those practitioners?
Headspace schools, I can only speak from the scope of my practice. Headspace school is a part of a different program that sits within the Headspace National Foundation. We had some interactions with them, and I can speak from that experience. Headspace school, they play quite an integral part and quite an important part in making sure that schools are supported, schools, teachers, and students, and everyone within that sector is well supported throughout the pandemic, throughout the engagement. We use a fair bit of resources in that space. Depending on the scope that they want, each school is different. And I know from my experience of my engagement with like some schools, I think every school requires a different model of practice. And with certain schools, you have to really adjust your resources in a way that that's not violating the basic principles of engagement. So one of the things that I was doing on a local capacity with one of the centers in Armidale, which is in Perth, is to go in the schools and provide some bullying workshops with the schools, because I think that was also something that was flagged by the local councillor, the police, the school councillor, and we needed the urge to do that, because that was coming quite often, and we found that there was quite it was quite a constructive workshop. As people were engaging, and they realized that it was something that's not right. So bullying in that space was not right. But we came from an angle of youth-centric, youth-centered, and in creative facilitators. We didn't want it to show up as authoritative figures in scaring off the kids and the children over there. So our approach was really different. We had to adjust the content. We had to adjust the dialogues. We had to adjust the videos because there were a couple of videos, one for the older group, one for the younger group. So we have to adjust all of that. And that's just part of one of our interactions with the schools. And again, the Headspace schools program, they keep a close monitor of the situation in all the schools. And if there is a client involved within the center and something escalates at some point, we have quite a good management system that that immediately gets deployed and managed by the executives and the teams, the specialists in Foundation, Headspace Foundation. So I can only tell from my experience of that small interactions that I had with the local school. Going in the detail is someone that you have to get from the, like a manager from the foundation. But yeah, I had a good interaction.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Hadi. Yeah, it seems like there's quite a few campaigns that run in Headspace and quite a few different sectors that get involved with really quite a large audience as well. So I'm going to talk briefly about another campaign, which you may not be involved with, but it'd be good to get your thoughts around. In 2016, Headspace developed the Big Stigma program campaign, which was launched to combat the shocking role that stigma plays in preventing young Australians seeking help for mental health issues. So I know you might not have been involved in that program directly because it might be before your time, but where do you think we as a society are when it comes to talking about mental health, and have we made progress from the time that you've been involved in the industry?
Well, I can only share what I think about the campaign. The campaign started a year before I joined the foundation. I joined in 2017. Stigma is a stigma campaign, and in general, stigma is a huge part of the community, and I think it's something that we need to address as a whole. I think Kano talked on it quite beautifully, put it together in terms of like us coming from a multicultural space. I'm half Afghani, half Pakistani, so me and some of the other Asian countries, we sit in the same sort of a spectrum where we know that there's a deep hidden conversation that do not often take place in houses, in homes, and places like that. So we, part of doing campaigns like this is to make sure that we are targeting that really important notion of breaking that stigma, because it's really I guess the first point of engagement is to break that stigma, so people start talking about a topic. Then further on, we can talk about having different models of engagement within the culture and linguistically diverse communities. It's often a hidden conversation, and people are a bit reluctant to open up about their feelings, especially men in the community. So we are quite mindful of that, and as the Headspace is one of the priority groups is to engage with the culturally and linguistically diverse community, and they have that on their targets, and campaigns are coming up, and as soon there's going to be another one soon to tackle this notion, I think, in a whole sense, because I know it's such a huge part of the community, and we need to do something about it, because it's quite damaging, especially if people are not engaging and they're not getting into those help-seeking behaviors. That makes it even hard for us, problematic down the track to manage something that has not been managed for so many years. Early intervention plays a big part of it. That's why we as a foundation provide early intervention services to make sure that people, when something happens, they come to us. It's manageable, we manage it, and if it's not manageable, we refer to the tertiary institutions. So yeah, really important part of our practice.
Yeah, thank you, Hadi. I think a recurring theme seems to be the normalization and bringing up the topic and spreading awareness about mental health and well-being seems to be coming through. So there's one final question I have for you, Hadi, is young people from Australia's culled background who identify as LGBTQI+, often find it hard to engage family members about their sexuality. Given Headspace's reach into the area, what are some of the tools people can use to help support young people who identify as LGBTQI+?
Well, it's quite a sensitive topic, and I think there's in the community there's different opinions about it. And one thing that we need to realize is that we need to support young people when there's a crisis. And at times like this, if someone's showing up, we in the organization we don't discriminate about what people are presenting with. we have shifted from the language of using I instead of we. We're using the language of we, saying we as a collective, we want to address this issue as a collective. We are not just one foundation. And we have started to reach out to different communities, different sectors. That's why we have like consortium meetings where we invite other members from different organizations to come and have a conversation about something like this. And really, it's all about having informative sessions, having deep community consultations, and having respectful consultations to make sure that we meet this targeted group. And yeah, it's a long journey. We are shifting from where we have started. The idea of like cult is getting introduced within the sector for the last few years, and on multiple occasions. And we are shifting our models of practice. We are shifting how we are working in this space, because I know down the track, Australia is going to look really different. And it's not it's a beautiful thing in its own, because now we know there's a lot that we can learn from one another. I myself bring this idea whenever I get opportunities within the sector, whether it's speaking in front of the camera or on the news or radio, anything like that, is to promote resilience and hope, because that's what really ties people together. At times like this, we all have come from different parts of the world, and I think that makes it really beautiful. Because personally, for myself, I've learned different levels of resilience. Because if something happens, I know what to do and what to tap into. So it's remarkable. Once back, I just went off with that question, but we are targeting on those groups. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Hadi. So many great insights, and it's great to see what Headspace is doing and continuing to do. So I really appreciate your time and for chatting with us. And I think the way that you summed it up with the word beautiful, that just sums it up really well. So before we start taking some questions, because I have seen quite a few come through, if you'd like to learn more about any of the issues we've discussed today, or if you'd like to speak to us about a research or communications project of your own, you can reach us directly via our website, loadagency.com.au, or you can email me directly at ash@loadagency.com.au. So I will handle it back to Kwabena to start getting some of these beautiful questions that we've had from our participants.
Fantastic. Look, I'm going to throw it out to all the panelists, and Krushnadevsinh, you might as well start with it, and then I'll get all the other panelists to chip in. Across this webinar, we've mentioned a few major problems that harm mental well-being of cold young people, such as racism, cultural stigma, and lack of family support. What could be some other negative factors that organisations and health services should be aware of, and are there any remedies?
Yeah, I think especially for young people, I think another big topic for diverse youth is the idea of identity. I think because sometimes I know I come from India, so I have that identity, but I grew up here. I have a bit of a hybrid between both, but then also at the same time, I have a third identity, which is Indian/Australian mixed. So I almost have three different identities to navigate. And I know when I was young, when I didn't know this terminology, wasn't introduced to these topics, wasn't aware of myself in school, especially. Now I'm 21, so I'm still young, but I think I'm still trying to figure out what identity do I pick, what one do I feel comfortable with. And I think as a young person, sometimes it's a bit hard and everyone does this when you're at home. You're proud of yourself, you're proud of your culture, you eat your own food, but when you go outside, you almost adopt a new identity and you're not yourself. So, and I think sometimes that causes a bit of a drift between if someone says something racist to you, but because you have a different identity or you're trying to fit in with the boys or trying to fit in with the typical Australian young person, you wouldn't stand up for yourself, or you wouldn't, you just play it off rather than actually actioning it. And I think organizations, I think Annie posted before, I did a video with ReachOut around cultural identity and navigating that. And I think organizations need to look at more of, okay, this person's obviously, I'm from an Indian background, but there's a whole different identity to me. So doing that one step further and looking at, okay, you're this visibly, or this is from a culture, but what else do you have? What identity do you have? What parts of your identity have you adopted or lost? And I think it's making sure organizations recognize that, and there is some, more messaging and more normalization of that.
Absolutely agree with that, especially with organizations. So organizations in general, but also just even like medical provision, like providers of medical care to these young people, need to have, I think, more awareness of that there are different needs with this audience, because as we found, there are too many instances, and in my personal experience as well, I've heard from friends so many times, like someone's gone to a doctor and they just don't get it. Like they're saying, oh, just leave your home, that'll fix everything. So I think there needs to be a bit more like cultural awareness, open like cultural awareness training in organizations and in like medical providers, which will be quite helpful. So when someone does actually reach out for help, which, there's a lot of work in getting someone to be ready to do that. Once they're there, they're not let down. So I think that's really important as well.
Fantastic. Hadi?
Yeah, I definitely agree with those points. Identity was something that came out with one of our own research. And I think I did it outside Headspace. I was with Australian Multicultural Foundation, and we came up with our own research at the time of COVID, where we had some flexibility in WA. We were given a small funding, and we did a report. We did a consultation. We went out to the community. We collected young people. We just sat down and had a table talk. The findings were all put together in a report, which I have. One theme, the first thing that came up was identity. Identity was something that everyone was talking about. It was something that repetitively was captured throughout the consultation. And as Kano mentioned, is one of the things where you sit between two multiple identities, and it is hard to find that balance. It's hard to find where you want to be recognized as a Pakistani, Afghani, or an Indian, or an Australian, or part Australian, part Afghani. So it's always that dilemma. From a practice scope, in a clinical space. There's a bit of a shift in not focusing on the clinical recovery side of stuff, but moving away from that and focusing on a lot of things that happens outside a person's space, because also that's also quite important for the person's recovery. We need to look at person as a whole. They can come to a service for 1 hour, but for 23 hours they're out there in the community. So we need to expand that scope of practice and think about how we can capture a holistic picture of this person's life with their identity, how they want to be recognized in Australia and everything else, and get a holistic sort of preventative measure in place. Because I think that's going to be more targeted towards the need of that person, instead of just focusing on the clinical side of a person's biological side of stuff. Yeah.
Beautiful, thanks, Hadi. And I might throw this one to you, which was an interesting question that we've received. So what practical tips and strategies can you suggest to increase mental health awareness and knowledge about available services among multicultural young people?
I think, sorry, was that to Hadi?
Starting with you, Hannah.
Okay. I think it's important to identify who those community leaders are for these multicultural young people. So, for example, even like schools, maybe within schools, teachers are, like the first kind of point of contact for these students, or community leaders in youth groups, places of worship. I think it's important to identify these avenues and to have these people kind of available to talk to multicultural youth, like when they need it, and to promote that awareness among these people as well, because they're people they trust. you're always going to trust someone you know over something you read on the internet or like a voice on a hotline. You're going to trust someone you know first, and usually you're going to go to someone you know first. So I think it's important to tap into those networks of support that young people already might have.
Thank you. And I'll throw to Kwabena to see if we have time for one more question.
Well, look, I mean, unfortunately, we don't. But frankly, this has been one of the most interesting conversations and very timely, I believe, especially as many states are going into lockdowns and especially for young people as well. We have amazing panelists who have explained, I guess, a lot of what's happening in the young, cold community space. And I hope many of our attendees were able to obtain some insightful information and learning about their experiences. If this session has again caused you any stress or concern, support services are available. The Lifeline number is 131114. We will share this recording via email and also via our website and social media channels. And we look forward to welcoming everyone back at our next webinar from the LOTE team. So to all our panelists, thank you so much for agreeing to this, and to everyone else out there in the internet, stay safe and look after yourself. Thank you.